Hey everyone, I'm back, and today we're going to be talking about American Psycho 2, All-American Girl. And this movie came out in 2002 and stars Mila Kunis and William Shatner. And I've never seen this movie before. I've always been curious about it because I was just wondering, how do you make a sequel to American Psycho, a movie that I really love? So if you want to hear my extended thoughts on that movie, I've reviewed it already, so go check that out. But this one was surprising to me because I was just constantly in shock of how bad this movie was. It just failed at everything it was going for, and I honestly don't even know where to start. Mila Kunis, she was trying to make this movie work. I thought she was like the best part of it. She wasn't great, but I felt as though she was putting in effort. And that's about it. And to start off, I'm just going to say that originally this movie had nothing to do with American Psycho. It was supposed to be its own standalone film, from what I heard. And, like, at a certain point in time, they just slapped on, hey, let's just make it American Psycho 2. And just go with that. In doing so, they just added in, I guess, some minor parts to connect it to the first American Psycho, and those parts feel really thrown in, and now that I know that's what happened behind the scenes, it really shows. And even while watching the movie, it feels like it has nothing to do with the original, because any connections it makes to the original film, it just mentions Patrick Bateman in like a classroom a few times, and they have like little flashbacks-ish, I guess. I think those were just scenes like taken directly from the original film. I think that's what happened. I don't even remember. But that's literally what they do. Just flashbacks and mention Patrick Bateman, his name, and that is it. Aside from that, this movie could have been its own thing, and it might have been a tiny bit better just because you wouldn't be constantly comparing the two movies as to like, here's why it works in the original film, and each choice in that movie has purpose and it adds it to the film, whereas this movie, it doesn't benefit the film. It just makes it worse, and I'll get into more detail in just a second, but every decision this movie makes just falls flat on its face. And I'm going to start with the comedy in this film, because there is a lot of bad comedy in this movie. And in the first film, there was comedy, but it was like dark comedy. It wasn't trying to be like slapstick or just in every scene that was in. It was like, oh, is Patrick Bateman going to kill this person in a really goofy way, or is something going to be presented something in a really silly way, or like, it's there, but it's very dark, and it complements the tone of the film. And in this movie, they have, in ways, I guess, a similar idea, but I was watching this movie with my mom, and she was kind of like half watching it because she wasn't really into it. And the reason why she was half watching it was because she wasn't the biggest fan of the original film, but here she pointed out something that made it so obvious and so funny that I cannot think of it in any other way. This movie, both on its own and in comparison to the first film, feels like a sitcom, the way it's structured, and like the sets and like the lighting, it all feels like a sitcom, and it's really distracting. And now that it's pointed out to me like that, I cannot look at this movie in any other way. Like, it's trying to be a sitcom, it's trying to be funny, but it fails because it doesn't know what it is, and it's just a bunch of ideas that could work on their own, but they don't work in this movie because it just doesn't fit. And there's lots of really bad acting, really bad character development, and the plot of the movie is really stupid, and the way it ties into the original American Psycho is completely unsatisfying. And there is not one satisfying death in this movie, or like that's kind of fun or anything like that. It's just, that happened, moving on to the next scene. And the editing in this movie didn't complement the film because it was trying a couple times to be like somewhat comedic with the editing, but it never worked out. And the music in this movie was horrendous. I hated the music in this movie, and that's another thing that made this film feel like a sitcom to me, is that it feels like something you would get from a sitcom, like a really bad one, and it just it's one of those scores that just felt like it was from something like that, and because of how it was used in the movie, and it's spammed over the course of the film, and it is really distracting and bad, and it does not complement the film in any way, and it just feels torn as to what it wants to be. And there is a lot of narration in this movie, and in the original film there was some narration from memory. I don't remember a whole lot. I remember it happening at the end, and I think it was at the beginning. Correct me if I'm wrong about this, but those were the only parts where there was narration. In this movie, it's throughout the entire film, and it doesn't need to be there, and it just ruins any chance to interpret the things. It just makes everything so obvious and on the nose and in your face, and it never once works. And there's a really bad chase scene towards the end, and the sound design in that chase scene is awful. Like, you can barely hear any sound effects. Like, there's a car crash at the end and you can barely hear it, and it was just really bad and not exciting in the slightest. This movie is also very short. It's slightly under an hour and a half, and I wasn't bored while watching it because I was kind of glued to how bad this movie was. And I didn't even mention this, but there were points in this movie where I was cringing a lot, and that's kind of what prevented me from being bored, was just cringing at how bad some of the comedy was, or just how stupid characters were. And the plot of the movie, it doesn't feel as though it serves much of a purpose. It just feels like it's there, and it's just to have things move from point A to point B. But it doesn't really feel purposeful in this movie, and it doesn't feel like it's building to anything, or at least anything that's satisfying, and it's just really underwhelming, and I was kind of annoyed. And that's about all I have to say about American Psycho 2. It's terrible. Don't watch it. It's probably the worst movie I've seen since You're Next. And I think I like this movie slightly better than You're Next, I think. Possibly, maybe. I'm not too sure. I think I was more entertained by this movie than I was with You're Next. Who knows? It's not like I'm going to watch either of those movies again, but this is just how I feel right now, and it doesn't do anything right. It fails to understand what made the original American Psycho work. It doesn't capture that same tone. The comedy fails, the horror fails. It's not satisfying as a slasher. The characters aren't interesting. The narration is completely pointless and doesn't need to be there at all, and just explains anything that you could interpret without it, but it just spells it out for you, and it's completely unnecessary when you do that. And the music was awful, the sound effects were awful, and just about everything's awful about this movie. And I can't even recommend this movie as a so bad it's good movie, because it's trying to be funny, and because it's trying to be funny and it fails, then I can't laugh at it because I'm just cringing at how bad the comedy is in this movie. So don't ever check this movie out. It might look interesting to you just to see like what it could be, and like for me it was like I've always wanted to see it. I knew almost nothing about it other than the fact that it was bad. And I was just curious about it, and I'm glad I finally watched it. But now I can officially say that it's bad, and I've seen it. I just don't know what else to say. It's just a bad movie, and don't ever watch it. So with all that being said, I'm going to give American Psycho 2 All-American Girl a 1 out of 10. Thank you for watching my videos as always. If you enjoyed this review, be sure to leave a like and comment down below you thought of American Psycho 2 All-American Girl, and my social media links, they will all be in the description, so follow me there. And last but not least, subscribe to be a part of Foley Nation, and I'll see you when I get my next review up, and that is going to be for Friday the 13th, Part 6, Jason Lives. So look forward to that, but until I get that up, thank you for watching and have a great day.